What would you do if you discovered that the rail tunnel you pass through every day on your commute was built upon the bones of those who never wanted it there? How many times have you traveled through darkness, completely unaware of the horrors entombed within the very walls surrounding you? In the autumn of 1891, as frost began to claim the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania, a discovery was made in the newly completed Summerhill Tunnel that would shake the small coal mining town of Portage to its core. What began as a routine inspection of the tunnel's drainage system quickly escalated into one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in Pennsylvania's history until now. The Summerhill Tunnel, stretching 1,200 feet through the Allegheny Mountains, was considered a marvel of modern engineering when it was completed by the Pennsylvania Railroad Company in 1886. Connecting Pittsburgh to the eastern seaboard, it promised prosperity and growth for the small communities dotting the mountainside. But according to recently unsealed documents from the Pennsylvania State Archives, the tunnel's construction came at a cost far greater than the $2 million officially recorded in railroad ledgers. "I was just doing my job," recalled Thomas Flanagan, the junior engineer who made the initial discovery on October 21, 1891. His statement, preserved in the original police report and recently recovered from county archives, continues. "Me and 2 others were sent to check the drainage channels after reports of unusual flooding. Water was backing up something fierce on the eastern end. I figured it was just debris. Happens all the time with these mountain tunnels. I never expected to find what we did." What Flanagan and his colleagues discovered that day was a human hand, partially preserved by the cold mountain water protruding from a maintenance alcove that had been hastily bricked over. When workers removed the bricks, they found not one body but 3, all male, all bearing signs of violent death, and all in workmen's clothing consistent with the tunnel's construction crew from 5 years prior. The Portage Weekly Chronicle, in its October 23rd edition, reported the discovery with surprising brevity. "Human remains discovered in railroad tunnel. Sheriff Donovan investigating possible accident during construction." But internal communications between the Sheriff's Office and the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, now available through Freedom of Information requests, tell a far more sinister story. "These men were not killed by accident," wrote Dr. Samuel Winters, the county coroner, in his confidential report dated October 25, 1891. "Each victim exhibits blunt force trauma to the cranium, administered from behind with considerable force. The position of the bodies and the manner in which they were concealed suggests premeditation. This was no accident. It was murder, plain and simple." The victims were eventually identified as Silas Weber, age 32, Michael Kovach, age 27, and James O'Malley, age 34. All 3 had been reported missing by family members during the final months of the tunnel's construction in late 1885, but their disappearances had been attributed to the common practice of workers abandoning difficult and dangerous jobs without notice. Records show that Sheriff Andrew Donovan initially pursued the investigation with vigor, interviewing dozens of former tunnel workers and railroad officials. His handwritten notes, recently discovered in a forgotten evidence box in the basement of the Cambria County Courthouse, reveal a man growing increasingly frustrated with the obstacles placed in his path. Interviewed Mr. Harrison Caldwell, site supervisor for Pennsylvania Railroad, reads an entry dated November 2nd. He claims no knowledge of the missing men, says turnover was high and records were poorly kept. When pressed about the location where bodies were found, became agitated and suggested I remember who pays most of the taxes in this county. Not the first such warning I've received this week. By December 1891, the investigation had stalled completely. No arrests were made. No charges were filed. The case quietly disappeared from public view, much like the victims themselves had years earlier. The tunnel continued to serve as a vital transportation artery, with thousands of passengers traveling through it daily, blissfully unaware of its grim secrets. For more than 130 years, the case remained unsolved, until Professor Eleanor Blackwood of Carnegie Mellon University began researching the history of Pennsylvania's railroad infrastructure for what she thought would be a routine academic publication. "I wasn't looking for a murder mystery," Blackwood explained to investigators in March 25. "I was examining labor conditions on major infrastructure projects of the late 19th century. The Summerhill Tunnel was just one of dozens I was researching. But there were discrepancies in the worker records, men who were there and then suddenly weren't, with no explanation. And the construction logs showed unusual delays and cost overruns that couldn't be explained by typical engineering challenges." Blackwood's persistence led her to explore connections between the tunnel project and other contemporaneous events in the region. What she uncovered was a web of corruption, labor unrest and violence that had been carefully concealed for over a century. Company records stored in the Pennsylvania Railroad corporate archives revealed that in 1885, as the tunnel neared completion, workers had begun organizing for better pay and safer conditions. Leading this nascent labor movement were three men, Weber, Kovacs, and O'Malley, the same three whose bodies would later be discovered in the tunnel wall. "I found private correspondence between Harrison Caldwell, the site supervisor, and William Preston, the railroad's regional director," Blackwood stated in her report to authorities. Caldwell wrote that the troublemakers have been dealt with and that work will proceed without further interference. The letter was dated August 12, 1885, the exact day after the three men were last seen alive. But the conspiracy extended beyond the railroad company. Newly discovered documents suggest that local officials, including Sheriff Donovan himself, may have been pressured or bribed to abandon the investigation. A bank ledger from First National Bank of Portage shows substantial deposits to Donovan's personal account in November and December 1891, just as the investigation was winding down. "I never wanted to believe it was all connected," wrote Deputy Samuel Hargrove in a never-mailed letter found among his personal effects after his suicide in 1902. "Andy, Sheriff Donovan, told me to let it go, said some things are better left buried, but I saw the look on Caldwell's face when we questioned him. That wasn't the face of an innocent man. That was the face of someone who'd already decided our investigation would go nowhere, because he'd made sure of it." As Professor Blackwood continued to uncover evidence, strange occurrences began to plague her research. Files would go missing from archives shortly after she requested them. Twice she arrived at her office to find it had been searched, though nothing of value was taken. And then there were the dreams. "They started about 3 months into my research," she confided to a colleague in an email recovered from her university account. "Always the same. I'm in the tunnel, but it's still under construction. I can hear men working, hammers on stone, but I can't see anyone. Then I hear shouting, a struggle, 3 distinct cries cut short, and then silence, except for the sound of bricks being laid. I wake up feeling like I can't breathe, like I'm the one being walled up in that alcove." Blackwood's research took an even darker turn when she discovered connections between the Summerhill killings and similar cases across the Pennsylvania Railroad network. In 1879, 4 workers disappeared during the construction of the Galitzin Tunnel, 20 miles east of Summerhill. In 1883, 2 labor organizers vanished while working on the Allegheny Viaduct. None of these cases were ever solved. "It wasn't just Summerhill," Blackwood wrote in her final research notes. "The Pennsylvania Railroad was expanding aggressively in the 1870s and 80s, and they couldn't afford delays or labor disputes. I believe they developed a systematic approach to dealing with worker unrest, one that included murder and concealment on a scale we're only beginning to understand. The breakthrough in the case came not from academic research, but from an unexpected source: ground-penetrating radar. As part of a routine structural assessment of the tunnel in January 25, engineers from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation detected anomalies in several sections of the tunnel walls. What they initially believed to be structural weaknesses turned out to be additional sealed alcoves. When the first of these alcoves was opened under the supervision of state police, the remains of 4 more individuals were discovered. Preliminary forensic analysis indicated these bodies had been concealed at approximately the same time as the original 3 victims, suggesting a much larger operation than previously thought. "We're dealing with a mass grave disguised as infrastructure," stated Special Agent Catherine Martinez of the Pennsylvania Bureau of Investigation in a sealed briefing to the governor. "Based on the anomalies detected throughout the tunnel, we estimate there could be as many as 15 to 20 more victims entombed within these walls." The most disturbing evidence, however, came from the journals of Harrison Caldwell himself. Hidden in a false bottom of an antique desk purchased at an estate sale by a collector in Pittsburgh, these journals had remained undiscovered for generations. When authenticated and examined by investigators, they revealed the full horror of what had occurred during the tunnel's construction. "August 9th, 1885. Had another visit from that damned Irishman O'Malley and his foreign friend today," Caldwell wrote. "Going on about unsafe shoring and men getting sick from the bad air. Threatened to contact the newspapers in Pittsburgh if conditions don't improve. Preston was very clear in his last telegram. No delays will be tolerated, regardless of cost. The directors have invested too heavily for this project to fail. We'll speak with Moriarty about handling the situation." 2 days later, a more cryptic entry appears. "Moriarty has taken care of our problem. Weber tried to intervene and has joined his friends. Regrettable but necessary. Preston has approved additional funds for Moriarty's men and for making certain arrangements within the eastern section. Construction will resume on schedule tomorrow." James Moriarty, identified in other documents as the tunnel project's head of security, appears to have been the primary enforcer for the railroad company. A former Pinkerton detective with a reputation for brutal efficiency, Moriarty had been brought in specifically to manage labor issues at several Pennsylvania railroad construction sites. "Moriarty's solution to labor unrest was permanent," explained Professor Blackwood in her testimony to investigators, "and the tunnel provided the perfect place to hide the evidence. Who would ever think to look inside solid walls? And even if someone suspected, how could they justify tearing apart critical infrastructure on a hunch? The killers created a tomb that would ensure their secrets remained buried for generations." As the investigation expanded, connections to local power structures began to emerge. The Summerhill Tunnel wasn't just a transportation project. It was the centerpiece of massive land speculation and development schemes throughout western Pennsylvania. Bank records show that several prominent families in Portage, Johnstown, and even Pittsburgh had invested heavily in land along the rail corridor, property that would multiply in value once the tunnel was completed. These weren't just random killings to silence a few troublesome workers, Agent Martinez noted in her case summary. This was systematic elimination of threats to a multi-million-dollar enterprise. And the conspiracy of silence that followed involved dozens of people at all levels of society, from the laborers who must have known what happened to their colleagues, to the highest levels of local government and industry who ensured no real investigation would ever take place. One of the most chilling aspects of the case emerged from interviews with longtime residents of Portage and the surrounding communities. For generations, locals had shared stories about the tunnel, how it was bad luck to linger there, how train crews reported strange sounds that couldn't be explained by acoustics or machinery, how maintenance workers refused to enter certain sections alone. "My grandfather worked maintenance for the railroad from 1920 to 1945, stated Michael Dunnigan, age 78, in a recorded interview. He wouldn't talk much about the tunnel, but he always said the same thing when we'd pass by it. That place was built on blood money, and those who spilled it never left. As kids, we thought he was just trying to scare us away from playing on the tracks. Now I wonder what he might have known or seen during those years. Local folklore had transformed over decades into ghost stories and urban legends. Tales of spectral workmen seen walking into the tunnel at dusk, of disembodied voices speaking in Irish and Hungarian accents, of unexplained cold spots that could freeze a worker's breath even on summer days. While easily dismissed as superstition, these stories had effectively kept alive the memory of a crime that official records had all but erased. Communities remember trauma, even when the details are lost, noted Dr. Elaine Chen, a cultural anthropologist consulted on the case. The specific facts of what happened in 1885 were covered up, but the emotional impact rippled through generations. The ghost stories were a way of processing and preserving what couldn't be openly discussed, that something terrible had happened there, and justice had never been served. As excavation of the alcoves continued through February and March, the body count rose steadily. By April 1st, the remains of 17 individuals had been recovered, making the Summerhill case one of the largest mass murder investigations in Pennsylvania history. Forensic anthropologists from the University of Pittsburgh worked to identify the victims, many of whom matched descriptions of workers reported missing during the tunnel's construction. But the case took an unexpected turn when DNA testing revealed that not all the victims were railroad workers. At least 3 of the bodies belonged to local residents of Portage, a journalist for the Weekly Chronicle who had been writing about dangerous working conditions, a clerk from the county records office, and the youngest son of a prominent family who, according to letters found in his effects, had been asking uncomfortable questions about workers who had vanished. This wasn't just about silencing labor organizers, Professor Blackwood concluded in her final report. This was about controlling the narrative completely, eliminating anyone who might expose what was happening, regardless of their position in society. The tunnel became a convenient disposal site for anyone threatening their operation. The most disturbing revelation came in late April, when excavation of the final identified alcove revealed not only human remains, but a metal strongbox containing documents, ledgers, correspondence, and a list of names. Some names were crossed out. These matched the identified victims, but many more names remained unmarked, including those of prominent citizens, judges, police officials, and business leaders throughout western Pennsylvania. We believe this represents what can only be described as a shadow government, stated Governor Harriet Williams in a confidential brief to federal authorities. The documents suggest that what began as an effort to silence opposition to the tunnel project evolved into something much more extensive, a network of influential individuals who used murder and intimidation to control regional development, resources, and politics for decades. The list of names extended well into the 1920s, suggesting that the organization had continued long after the tunnel's completion. More disturbing still, several family names on the list matched those of current politicians and business leaders in the state, raising questions about how far the conspiracy's influence might have extended into the present. As investigators worked to connect the historical crimes to potentially ongoing corruption, strange incidents began to plague the investigation. Key evidence disappeared from secure storage. A fire destroyed part of the laboratory where remains were being analyzed. 2 investigators reported being followed by unmarked vehicles. There's a reason this case remained unsolved for 130 years, Agent Martinez noted in a secured communication to her superiors. Whoever buried these bodies didn't just die off. They built something that outlasted them, a structure of power and influence that's preserved itself through generations. And that structure is now fighting to maintain its secrets. The situation reached a crisis point in early May when Professor Blackwood disappeared from her home in Pittsburgh. Security footage showed her leaving voluntarily at 2:15 a.m., getting into her own car and driving away. The vehicle was later found abandoned near the eastern entrance to the Summerhill Tunnel. Despite an extensive search of the area and the tunnel itself, no trace of Blackwood has been found. 3 days after her disappearance, every member of the investigation team received an identical envelope containing a single sheet of paper. On it was written a quotation attributed to William Preston, the railroad director implicated in the original murders. "Some secrets are meant to remain buried. The foundations upon which we've built our prosperity cannot be disturbed without bringing down all that stands upon them." The investigation continues, but progress has slowed considerably. Public interest in the case remains high, but official statements have become increasingly vague and infrequent. Unofficial sources within the investigation suggest that pressure is being applied from multiple directions to scale back or even abandon the case entirely. "We're hitting the same wall that Sheriff Donovan hit in 1891, said one anonymous investigator. "Different faces, same interests. There are people in positions of power who don't want this case solved, not because they committed these murders themselves, but because they've benefited from the system those murders helped create." You start pulling on this thread, and you don't just unravel a historical crime, you potentially unravel the entire power structure of Western Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, the Summerhill Tunnel remains in operation, though a single track has been closed to facilitate the ongoing investigation. Passengers traveling through it report an increased sense of unease, a heaviness in the air that wasn't present before the discoveries began. Some claim to hear whispering in the darkness as they pass through, voices speaking in languages they don't understand, but somehow still comprehend. They're saying the same thing, over and over, reported Amanda Schwartz, a regular commuter on the Pittsburgh-Altoona line. Justice. They're asking for justice. As the summer of 25 approaches, the question remains, will justice finally come to the victims of the Summerhill Tunnel, or will their killers, both the long-dead perpetrators and their institutional heirs, succeed once again in burying the truth beneath layers of silence, corruption, and fear? In the words of Deputy Hargrove's final journal entry found beside his body in 1902, "Some stains don't wash away. The blood in that tunnel calls out and will keep calling until someone listens. God help us all when that day comes." Have you ever wondered what secrets might be buried beneath the infrastructure you rely on every day? As the investigation into the Summerhill Tunnel murders continued through the summer months of 2025, the case expanded in ways that few could have anticipated. What began as a historical cold case soon revealed connections to dozens of unsolved disappearances spanning more than a century, and evidence that the organization responsible might still be operating in the shadows of Pennsylvania's power structures. The search for Professor Eleanor Blackwood intensified following her mysterious disappearance in early May. Surveillance footage from businesses along Route 22 showed her vehicle traveling east toward the tunnel at approximately 2:37 a.m., but no cameras captured her return journey. Her cell phone last pinged a tower near the eastern tunnel entrance before going permanently offline. "I spoke with Eleanor the night before she vanished," revealed Dr. Marcus Winters, her colleague at Carnegie Mellon University. "She was excited, almost feverish. Said she'd made a breakthrough, found a connection between the original tunnel murders and something called the Allegheny Covenant. She promised to show me her findings the next morning, but she never arrived." The term Allegheny Covenant became a focal point for investigators who initially found no historical reference to such an organization. However, a breakthrough came when Agent Martinez's team discovered a small leather-bound ledger hidden inside the false bottom of Harrison Caldwell's desk, the same antique furniture piece that had yielded his journals months earlier. The Covenant Ledger contained membership records dating from 1883 to 1911, explained forensic historian Dr. Robert Chen in his confidential report to investigators. It lists over 140 members, identified only by assigned numbers and initials, along with substantial financial contributions. Based on cross-referencing with other historical records, we believe these members represented the wealthiest and most influential families in western Pennsylvania during that period. Entries in the ledger suggested that the Allegheny Covenant began as a business association focused on railroad expansion, but evolved into something far more sinister. Meeting minutes, encoded but successfully deciphered by FBI cryptanalysts, revealed discussions of removing obstacles and securing permanent silence from those who threatened their interests. We must understand the historical context, Dr. Chen emphasized in his report. The late 19th century was a period of virtually unregulated capitalism and weak governmental oversight. Organizations like the Covenant operated with impunity, viewing themselves not as criminals, but as architects of progress, willing to eliminate any who stood in their path. As investigators worked to identify Covenant members from the historical records, they discovered disturbing patterns connecting the organization to dozens of unsolved disappearances beyond the tunnel murders. Between 1880 and 1920, over 60 individuals who had opposed railroad development, labor organizers, journalists, and even local politicians had vanished without trace throughout western Pennsylvania. One particularly chilling entry, dated October 1887, read simply, "Problem at Johnstown resolved. Asset M reports that subject and evidence have been permanently secured beneath new dam foundation. Cost $500. We believe this refers to the disappearance of Edward Collins, a civil engineer who had expressed concerns about the safety of the South Fork Dam," Agent Martinez noted in her case files. Collins vanished 2 years before the dam failed in 1889, causing the Johnstown flood that killed over 2,000 people. His safety warnings were apparently silenced by the Covenant, possibly to avoid costly repairs to the dam. The investigation took a dramatic turn in late June when a maintenance worker at the Allegheny County Courthouse discovered a hidden vault during renovation work in the building's sub-basement. The vault, concealed behind a false wall and sealed with an elaborate locking mechanism, contained records dating back to the courthouse's construction in 1888, including architectural plans for secret chambers and tunnels beneath several prominent Pittsburgh buildings. "I've been working in this building for 27 years and never knew this existed," stated Frank Kowalski, the worker who made the discovery. "The wall looked just like all the others, but it sounded different when I tapped it. Hollow, you know. When we opened it up, the air that came out was so stale it made my eyes water. Felt like we were letting out something that had been trapped for a long time." Among the documents recovered from the vault was a leather portfolio marked with the symbol of the Allegheny Covenant, a stylized bridge spanning a mountain pass. The portfolio contained detailed plans for what appeared to be ceremonial chambers constructed beneath at least 7 major buildings in Pittsburgh, Johnstown, and Altoona, all built during the railroad expansion boom of the 1880s and 90s. "These weren't just meeting rooms," explained Dr. Eliza Montgomery, an anthropologist specializing in secret societies after examining the plans. "The layouts, the specific dimensions, the orientation, these chambers were designed for ritualistic purposes. The central area in each chamber is arranged like an altar or focal point with drainage systems built into the floor. I've seen similar designs in certain occult organizations from that era, particularly those that combined business interests with esoteric practices. Most disturbing were the handwritten annotations on several of the plans, noting specific dates when dedications or consecrations had taken place, dates that investigators found corresponded with reported disappearances in those cities. One notation on the plans for a chamber beneath the original Pennsylvania Railroad headquarters in Pittsburgh read, "Foundation consecrated with the essence of 7 devoted servants, October 1884. Historical records confirmed that 7 construction workers had been reported missing that month. "We're dealing with something far beyond ordinary corruption or murder," Agent Martinez stated in a classified briefing to federal authorities in early July. The evidence suggests that the Allegheny Covenant was not just eliminating opposition to their business interests. They were using human sacrifice as part of their organizational practices. They believed these killings would literally strengthen the foundations of their empire. As excavation began at sites identified in the hidden plans, the body count rose dramatically. Beneath the former Pennsylvania Railroad headquarters, now a luxury hotel in downtown Pittsburgh, the remains of 23 individuals were discovered in a sealed chamber 20 feet below the building's foundation. Forensic analysis indicated that the victims had been buried over a period spanning from 1884 to 1917, suggesting that the practice continued long after the building's completion. Similar chambers yielded grim discoveries in Johnstown, Altoona, and beneath the Allegheny County Courthouse itself. In total, the remains of 117 individuals were recovered by the end of July, making the Allegheny Covenant case the largest serial murder investigation in Pennsylvania history. Yet despite the mounting evidence and the historical nature of many of the crimes, investigators encountered increasing resistance to their work. Budget allocations for the investigation were repeatedly delayed or reduced. Key personnel were reassigned to other cases. Media coverage, initially intense, began to diminish despite the sensational nature of the discoveries. "There are forces at work here that don't want this investigation to continue," wrote Agent Martinez in a personal journal recovered after her sudden transfer to an FBI field office in Alaska in early August. "I've been told directly by 3 separate supervisors to focus on historical documentation and to avoid speculation about modern connections. When I presented evidence linking current property holdings to Covenant members' descendants, my reports were classified and effectively buried." The modern connections that concerned Martinez involved the discovery that descendants of original Covenant members still controlled significant portions of Pennsylvania's real estate, energy, resources, and political infrastructure. Analysis of property records, corporate filings, and campaign finance documents revealed that 17 families with direct lineage to the original Covenant collectively owned over 30% of commercial real estate in Pittsburgh, Johnstown, and Altoona, as well as substantial holdings in natural gas, coal, and transportation companies throughout the region. "The original blood money never stopped working," noted financial investigator Samuel Weiss in a report that was subsequently classified. "The wealth generated through these murders was invested, grown, and passed down through generations. Today's power brokers may not have blood on their hands directly, but their position and influence were built on a foundation of murder and terror." Perhaps most concerning were the indications that the Covenant had never truly disbanded, but had simply evolved into more subtle forms. Examination of membership records from exclusive social clubs, charitable foundations, and corporate boards throughout western Pennsylvania revealed consistent patterns of association among descendants of original Covenant members, along with rituals and traditions that, while outwardly benign, contained elements strikingly similar to those described in the 19th century Covenant documents. "There's an annual dinner held at the Pittsburgh Metropolitan Club that's been running continuously since 1897, explained Dr. Montgomery. "Attendance is strictly limited to descendants of certain families we now know were Covenant members. The dinner includes toasts to those who secured our foundations and references to the bridges that united our fortunes. To outsiders, it sounds like harmless tradition. In context, it's clearly commemorating the original crimes that established their wealth. The investigation reached a critical point in early September when excavation began at the final site identified in the hidden architectural plans, a chamber supposedly located directly beneath the eastern entrance to the Summerhill Tunnel. According to the annotations on the plans, this chamber was designated as the first altar and the heart of the covenant. Work proceeded slowly due to the need to maintain rail operations and the technical challenges of excavating beneath an active tunnel. On September 12th, at approximately 2:15 a.m., exactly 4 months after Professor Blackwood's disappearance, workers broke through into a large, previously sealed chamber. What they found inside defied easy explanation. The chamber was approximately 40 feet in diameter, with walls of finished marble, not the rough stone you'd expect in a tunnel foundation, stated Dr. James Harrison, the archaeological supervisor assigned to the excavation. The floor featured an elaborate mosaic depicting a bridge spanning a chasm, with human figures appearing to fall or be thrown from the structure. At the center was a stone altar, heavily stained with what preliminary testing confirms is human blood, layers upon layers of it, applied over decades. Most shocking was the discovery of what appeared to be recent activity in the chamber. Despite being sealed behind walls that hadn't been breached in over a century, investigators found evidence that the room had been accessed and used within the past year. Modern candle remnants, fresh bloodstains on the altar, and a digital camera memory card placed deliberately at the center of the altar. The memory card contained a single video file dated May 3, 2025, the night of Professor Blackwood's disappearance. The content of this video has been classified at the highest levels, but sources within the investigation described it as showing a ceremony conducted by robed figures whose faces remained concealed. At the center of the ceremony was a woman identified as Eleanor Blackwood, apparently conscious but restrained. The video confirmed our worst fears. An anonymous source within the investigation revealed the covenant never died. It simply went underground, maintaining its traditions and practices while evolving its public face. And somehow, they've maintained access to these chambers without leaving any trace in the surrounding structures. It's as if they have passages we still haven't discovered, an entire hidden network running beneath our feet. Following this discovery, federal authorities officially took control of the investigation, removing state and local law enforcement from all aspects of the case. Public statements indicated only that significant historical evidence had been recovered and that analysis would continue. No mention was made of Professor Blackwood, the video, or the evidence of ongoing covenant activities. For the residents of Portage, Summerhill, and surrounding communities, the abrupt shift in the investigation did not go unnoticed. Local newspapers, which had covered the case extensively, found their information sources suddenly cut off. When the Johnstown Tribune-Democrat ran a front-page story questioning the federal takeover, its editor received a visit from individuals identifying themselves as Department of Homeland Security agents, who cited national security concerns related to the case. In the absence of official information, rumors and speculation flourished. Several residents reported strange activities around the tunnel: unmarked vehicles coming and going at odd hours, unusual security measures, and sections of the surrounding forest being unexpectedly closed to the public for unspecified environmental testing. Most disturbing were the reports from railroad workers and passengers of unexplained phenomena in and around the tunnel. Engineers reported sudden, inexplicable equipment malfunctions while passing through. Passengers described experiencing intense, shared nightmares during the brief minutes inside the tunnel. Dreams of falling from great heights, of being walled up alive, of voices crying out from behind stone. "Something's changed in there," stated Michael Dunnigan, the elderly resident who had earlier shared his grandfather's warnings about the tunnel. It was always a bad place, gave people the creeps. But now it's like whatever was sleeping in there has woken up. My grandson works maintenance for the railroad, and he says none of the crews will go in there alone anymore. They're hearing things, voices arguing in languages nobody speaks anymore, sounds of construction that stop when you try to locate them, crying that seems to come from inside the walls themselves. As October 25 approached, marking 134 years since the original discovery of bodies in the tunnel, public interest in the case resurged despite the official silence. Candlelight vigils were held in Portage for Professor Blackwood and the historical victims. Amateur researchers and conspiracy theorists flocked to the area, exchanging information online and attempting to piece together what the authorities were no longer sharing. It was one such researcher, 23-year-old journalism student Sofia Martinez, no relation to the FBI agent, who made the connection that brought the case back to public attention. Analyzing property records and corporate filings available through public databases, she identified a pattern that had escaped official notice. Every major construction project in western Pennsylvania since 1880 had experienced at least one disappearance during its foundation phase. It's not just historical, Martinez explained in a podcast that quickly went viral. I tracked 67 major projects completed in the region over the past 20 years. Office towers, hospitals, bridges, tunnel renovations. 62 of them had at least one worker reported missing during foundation work or initial construction. None of these cases were solved. Most were dismissed as workers abandoning their jobs or relocating without notice. Exactly the same explanation given for the original tunnel victims in 1885. Martinez went further, identifying the common denominator among these projects. All were constructed on land owned by or developed by companies traced back to descendants of original Covenant members, or financed through banks controlled by the same families. The pattern was so consistent that it defied coincidence. They never stopped, her podcast concluded. They just got better at hiding it. The Covenant believes in blood sacrifice as a foundation for their success, literally building their empire on human lives. And based on the pattern, it's still happening, right now, under our feet. 3 days after the podcast aired, Sofia Martinez disappeared from her apartment in Pittsburgh. Her laptop and research materials vanished with her. Official reports classified her as a missing person, with police suggesting she may have left town due to the attention her theories had attracted. No active investigation was launched, despite demands from her family and growing public outcry. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected began to happen in western Pennsylvania. Rather than fading from public consciousness as officials may have hoped, the case sparked a grassroots movement. Citizens began conducting their own research, sharing information online, and organizing protests demanding transparency about both historical crimes and modern disappearances. The movement gained unexpected allies when several employees of companies linked to Covenant descendants came forward with their own stories. A security guard at a Pittsburgh financial firm described being instructed to avoid certain sub-basement areas on specific dates. A maintenance worker at the Allegheny County Courthouse revealed the existence of locked rooms that didn't appear on any building plans. A secretary at a prominent real estate development company shared internal memos referencing traditional site preparation for new projects, procedures that required absolute privacy and involved select contractors who commanded extraordinary fees. As public pressure mounted, cracks began to appear in the official silence. In late October, an anonymous source within the federal investigation leaked hundreds of documents to multiple media outlets simultaneously, ensuring that the information couldn't be easily suppressed. These documents included photographs of the hidden chambers, forensic analyses of the victims, and most explosively, a partial list of current individuals believed to be continuing Covenant practices. The list included names that shocked the region: 3 state senators, 7 judges, 12 prominent business leaders, and the chiefs of police in 4 major Pennsylvania cities. All were descendants of original Covenant members. All had been present at private ceremonies held at locations now identified as Covenant ritual sites. Within 24 hours of the leak, 5 of the named individuals had died by what were officially ruled suicides. 7 others fled the country on private aircraft. The remainder issued vehement denials, while their attorneys threatened legal action against media outlets reporting on the leaked documents. Federal authorities responded by acknowledging portions of the historical investigation while continuing to deny any evidence of modern Covenant activity. A carefully worded statement from the Department of Justice confirmed the discovery of multiple chambers and historical remains, attributing them to a regional criminal organization that operated in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, targeting labor organizers and others who opposed industrial development. The statement concluded, "While these historical crimes are disturbing, there is no credible evidence linking them to current individuals or organizations." The Department of Justice cautions against speculation that may unjustly damage the reputations of prominent citizens or inflame public sentiment. For many Pennsylvania residents, this official dismissal only confirmed their suspicions. Protest movements grew, with demonstrators gathering at sites linked to the original Covenant. Citizen researchers continued sharing information, creating databases of missing persons cases potentially linked to modern construction projects. Journalists from national media organizations began arriving in the region, conducting their own investigations into both historical crimes and contemporary disappearances. The situation reached a turning point on October 21st. The anniversary of the original 1891 discovery, when workers performing maintenance in the Summerhill Tunnel reported hearing sounds coming from behind a previously unexplored section of the wall. Breaking through the masonry, they discovered a narrow passage leading downward, apparently bypassing the chamber that had been excavated by authorities the previous month. Before officials could secure the site, video of the passage was live-streamed by one of the workers. The footage, viewed by millions before being removed from social media platforms, showed a steep staircase descending nearly 100 feet below the tunnel level. At the bottom was a metal door bearing the now infamous Covenant symbol. The worker's livestream ended abruptly as he approached the door, cutting to static. When authorities arrived 30 minutes later, they found no trace of the maintenance crew. The passage they had discovered had been sealed with fresh concrete that, according to later analysis, had been mixed and applied with professional skill and equipment that should have been impossible to transport to and use in the location within that time frame. In the days following this incident, the region experienced a series of unexplained phenomena that many connected to the disturbance of the hidden passage. Residents within a 20-mile radius of the tunnel reported the same dream on 3 consecutive nights. A procession of figures in 19th-century clothing walking silently toward the tunnel entrance, their faces obscured, but their posture suggesting purpose and determination. Electrical and communication systems throughout western Pennsylvania experienced intermittent failures. Geological instruments at the University of Pittsburgh recorded subtle seismic activity centered on the tunnel location, patterns that one researcher described as more like rhythmic movement than natural seismic events, almost as if something large was stirring beneath the ground. Most unsettling were the reports from children in communities surrounding the tunnel site. Without prompting or prior knowledge of the case, dozens of children between the ages of 4 and 12 began drawing the same image: a bridge spanning a mountain pass, with stick figures falling or being thrown from it. When asked about their drawings, many gave variations of the same response: "The hungry bridge told me to draw it." As October gave way to November, federal authorities established a 5-mile exclusion zone around the Summerhill Tunnel, citing unspecified environmental hazards and structural concerns. Rail traffic was permanently rerouted. Roads passing near the tunnel were closed. Residents of Summerhill and portions of Portage were offered generous relocation packages, with many choosing to leave despite deep historical ties to the area. Those who remained reported increasing incidents of unexplained phenomena, voices emerging from household drains and ventilation systems, faucets running with water that, while testing normal in composition, carried the unmistakable metallic scent of blood, unexplained knockings from within walls that followed patterns corresponding to covenant symbols when mapped over time. The official investigation effectively ended on November 12th, when a fire of undetermined origin destroyed the secure facility where evidence from the case was being stored. All physical artifacts, including remains, documents, and the digital evidence recovered from the ritual chamber, were reportedly lost. The federal task force was disbanded, with its members reassigned to widely dispersed locations across the country. In the vacuum left by the official withdrawal, unofficial investigations continue. Citizen researchers share information on encrypted platforms, documenting disappearances, tracking property transactions linked to Covenant descendants, and maintaining surveillance on sites identified as potential ritual locations. Journalists pursue leads despite editorial pressure to abandon the story. Academic researchers like Dr. Montgomery continue analyzing historical records, seeking to understand the true nature and extent of the Covenant's activities. And beneath the mountains of western Pennsylvania, something stirs. Rail crews working lines that pass near the now-abandoned tunnel report, hearing a sound like massive machinery in operation, though no construction or mining is authorized in the area. Hikers in the surrounding forests describe a sensation of being watched by presences that remain just out of sight. Geologists note that the pattern of subtle seismic activity has not only continued, but intensified, following cycles that correspond to dates of significance in the Covenant's historical record. In mid-December, an unexpected development briefly reignited public attention to the case. A package arrived at the offices of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, containing a USB drive and a handwritten note. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the handwriting matched that of Professor Eleanor Blackwood. The note read simply, "They never just wanted wealth or power. The sacrifices were always about something else, something they found beneath the mountain while digging the tunnel, something ancient that offered them a bargain. I've seen it now. God help us all, I've seen it. And it's waking up. The great work continues." The USB drive contained over 2,000 files, research notes, photographs, scanned historical documents, and audio recordings of interviews Blackwood had conducted before her disappearance. Among these was a fragment of what appeared to be a ritual text recovered from the original Covenant records, containing a passage that many find disturbing in light of recent events. "That which sleeps beneath the mountains shall awaken when the blood price is fully paid. 133 years shall the Covenant maintain the sacred trust, preparing the way through foundation and sacrifice. When the appointed time arrives, the final keystones shall be placed, the passages shall be opened, and that which has slumbered shall reclaim its dominion. The faithful shall be elevated as its regents upon the earth, while the unbelievers shall become as mortar in the foundations of its new kingdom." The authenticity of this text remains disputed, with some dismissing it as an elaborate hoax. Yet those who have studied the case most closely note that 133 years from the tunnel's completion in 1886 would correspond precisely to 2019, the year when the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation began the structural assessment that eventually led to the discovery of the bodies sealed in the tunnel walls. Today, the Summerhill Tunnel stands abandoned, sealed at both ends by massive concrete barriers bearing warning signs citing structural instability. Armed security contractors patrol its perimeter, turning away curiosity seekers and paranormal investigators drawn by its notorious history. Satellite imagery shows extensive construction activity in the surrounding mountains, officially attributed to environmental remediation projects, though no public records detail the nature or purpose of this work. The disappearances continue. In the past 6 months, 27 individuals connected to the case have vanished without explanation. Researchers, journalists, witnesses, and others who asked too many questions or ventured too close to the truth. Official investigations into these disappearances remain perfunctory, with most attributed to voluntary departure or misadventure. Yet despite the silence from authorities and the apparent suppression of evidence, the story refuses to die. It persists in whispered conversations, in online forums, in the collective memory of a region that has lived too long in the shadow of unexplained tragedy. The people of Western Pennsylvania have always known, on some level, that the prosperity of their communities was built on foundations laid in blood and sealed with secrets. Now they are beginning to understand that the price of those secrets may be higher than anyone imagined. The question that haunts them is not whether justice will ever come for the victims of the past, but whether something far worse than injustice is stirring beneath their feet, awakened by the disturbance of crimes long buried but never truly forgotten. In her final recorded interview, conducted 3 days before her disappearance, Professor Blackwood offered a warning that many now view as prophetic. History isn't just a record of the past, it's a living force that shapes our present and future. The Covenant understood this. They didn't just kill to eliminate opposition or even to enrich themselves. They killed because they believed death had power, that it could be harnessed, channeled, invested like capital to yield returns across generations. What if they were right? What if all that death, all that pain, all that injustice was actually feeding something? And what happens when that something decides it's time to collect on its investment? The great work continues. The foundations tremble, and beneath the mountains of Pennsylvania, ancient hungers stir.